All right, so we're down on our lesson 3, preparing for the assessment. So a VB-MAPP administration begins well before you sit down with a learner. So this section walks you through everything that happens beforehand and during the session itself. So like doing a pre-scoring pass, gathering the right materials, sending a reinforcer survey at home, establishing up rapport, a full set of testers tips and how to sequence a test and read the environment, and how to handle reinforcement, scoring judgment calls, and ending the session well. So what follows reflects both the guide's general administration guidelines and the practical tips that distilled in Euniacare training materials. Alright, so here's what we're going to cover today in sequence. So first is the before session, a pre-scoring pass, gathering level appropriate materials, and sending a reinforcer survey at home. And the next one is establishing rapport, which every source this section draws from treats as non-negotiable. And during testing, 9 tester tips condensed from guides tips for the tester table, testing sequence, environment, and how to spot barriers as you go rather than a separate step. And the fourth and finally, reinforcement, scoring judgment, and how to end the session well. So before you ever sit down with a learner, walk yourself through every milestones using whatever background information you already have available. So it can be intake form assessment, prior evaluations or progress reports, caregiver or teacher's interview. Write in any scores you're already confident about based on that information, and flag the items that genuinely need direct testing. This one step dramatically shortens live testing time and keeps your in-person session focused on the data you don't already have. And the most important thing is preparing and organizing materials beforehand, and most especially match your materials to the level you expect to test. So I'm going to explain to you shortly what you need in all levels, or in level 1 or in level 2. So for all levels, you're going to be needing these materials. So you may want to grab a stopwatch, timer, or a watch with a second hand for timed items, pencil, writing materials, and data sheets for notes and tallying responses, and a range of reinforcers appropriate to the learner. It can be a slinky, toys, whatever that is in the preference assessment. Right, so for level 2, you're going to be needing a few materials like items that evokes demanding for a missing part, like a juice box without a straw, or a track without a train, or Mr. Potato Head without without eye, bubbles without the wand, balloons without an air, and picture books, cards, because you're going to be asking few with the LRFFC, MTS, and tacting, and 25 identical items for matching to sample, sets of familiar colored items, shapes for sorting, children's scissors, glue stick, crayon, arts and crafts, and recordings or items that make environmental sounds, such as like something to press a button or instruments. And where possible, have the family complete a reinforcer survey before the session, and it's really important. Knowing a learner's favorite snack, toys, songs, and people ahead of time improves the quality and efficiency of your MAD and TACT assessment. And it means you're assembling materials that will actually motivate the specific learner instead of guessing once you're already in the room. So every single source in this module draws from providing rewards, right? But this is non-negotiable. Establish rapport and pair yourself with reinforcement before you place a single demand on the learner. And keep your demands initially in a minimum and progress cautiously. Because if your very first interaction with a learner is a new instruction, you risk evoking escape or avoidance behavior. So before you've collected a single valid data point, and that behavior will contaminate the rest of the sessions, and you don't want that. So give rapport building real and unhurried time. So don't rush this to get the real testing, because this is part of the real testing. All right, let's get into the tester's tips. So the tips on the next few slides are condensed from the guide's tips from the tester's table, and they apply through every module in this course and not just Module 1. So treat this as your default operating habits for every VB-MAPP session you run from here forward. And also there's a handout guide as well that for your reference. Again, this is the first group of tips focused on setup. So again, have the family complete a reinforcer survey before the assessment and use it to identify the items for manned, tact, and listener testing. And also establish rapport and pair yourself with reinforcement before placing any demand. So again, what I said earlier, keep initial demands minimal and progress cautiously. And maintain control of the test items and reinforcers throughout the session. If the learner has free access to everything, you lose your ability to set up clean. For example, when you're doing manding, you can put the items here in the side while your learner is there in the front. So that way it's easier for you to manipulate and create that opportunity of requests or tact or listener responding. So second group is on reinforcement delivery and energy. So reinforce correct responses using a schedule appropriate to the learner. Okay? Reinforce desirable behaviors such as attending, sitting, making eye contact, and use descriptive social praise, specific ones like, oh, I love how you're looking at me, or nice looking, or you're a cool guy, rather than robotic phrases. And smile when you praise, because you want to give the learner a reason to look at you, And use an appropriate level of enthusiasm, like a more animated tone for unprompted and independent responses help mark those responses as especially valuable, right? Like differential reinforcement. When it is prompted, then you say, okay, good. But if he got independent response, you say enthusiastically or exaggerated social praise. And acknowledge and respond to spontaneous vocalizations and gestures like smile, nod, laugh at the learner's humor, if he's joking, even if it's not funny, but it's okay because it's part of the assessment. And keep the whole process engaging. Deliver reinforcer in fun, theatrical ways, like flying a toy in like an airplane or driving car across the table. So you want to make it fun. You want to make this whole session fun. And occasionally provide a free, non-contingent reinforcer just to keep that relationship warm and cool, Now that you learned that vibe is important, here is our third and final group on testing technique itself. Use a mix of preferred and novel items. Like a novelty on its own can evoke tacts and mans that narrow item to set would miss. So choose age-appropriate reinforcing items and activities even when the learner's skills level is below their chronological age. For early manding, follow the learner's motivating operation, MO, like go to the swing, hold back briefly, and prompt what you want rather than pushing it immediately. And allow mini breaks during testing, like matching to sample, but don't give free access to the learner's most powerful reinforcers during the break. And avoid excessive cueing or prompting during testing. It masks the learner's true operant level and inflates the score. Also, give the learner 3 to 5 seconds to respond before moving on, and repeat a question or task presentation 2 to 3 items if needed. And use least to most prompting to probe the learner's true skill ceiling, as this isolates from independent responding from prompted responding. And lastly, always end a testing session on a correct response, and most importantly, a positive note. So there's no strict required order for testing. You can move between skills areas as your learner's attention and materials allow, and a mixed format often keeps a learner more engaged than working straight through one domain at a time. And that said, some higher numbered milestones build an earlier ones within the same domain. Like later manned items assume earlier ones already in place, for example. So keep the internal logic in mind when you jump around. And testing and observation can happen in a classroom, home, or community setting, and there's no overall time limit on the assessment except for the specific milestone that call for a timed observation. So choose your settings deliberately. Like a playroom full of toys might be too distracting for matching to sample testing at a table, but it's perfect for assessing independent play and social play. So assess for barriers at the same time you're assessing milestone and not as separate follow-up to step you to track on afterwards. Some barriers are obvious and caregivers will likely have already reported them. So like problem behaviors, self-stimulation, or hyperactivity, and others are subtler, like a defect man repertoire, prompt dependency, scrolling responses, failure to generalize, and catching those during the session itself takes a trained professional eye. And at this stage, your goal is simply to determine whether a barrier exists, and the full barriers assessment, scoring, and analysis is covered in Module 5. And score functional approximations carefully. So what do I mean by this? Reinforce correct responses using a schedule appropriate to the individual learner, and note functional approximations in the comment sections rather than automatically score them as full independent response. You just have to write it down. Here's a concrete example. If a learner reliably says ook when shown a book, that can count as a known tact for that item, right? But if the same sound gets used indiscriminately for lots of different items, it isn't functionally correct and shouldn't be scored as mastered. And remember, you don't need to formally test items that are clearly beyond a learner's current skill level, because you just have to use your judgment and lean on that pre-scoring pass so you're not wasting time during your session, and learner goodwill on items where you already know the outcomes, And lastly, always end on a correct response. So whatever else happens in the session always ends on a correct response and a positive note. The learner's last experience with you in that sitting should be a successful one. It protects rapport heading into the next session, and it keeps future testing easier and not harder. So this is a small thing to remember at the end of the long session, but it matters as much as anything else in this section. And to recap, so Module 1 as a whole, the VB-MAPP assesses verbal behavior by function, man, tact, intraverbal, and so on, not just by topography. So the same word can be several different operands depending on what controls it. Okay, and the tool has 5 components: milestones, barriers, transition, task analysis, and skills tracking, and the placement and IEP goals guide. And the VB-MAPP milestones itself has 170 milestones across 3 levels, 9 and 12 and 13 domains, and 16 unique skills domains total. Scored 0, 1/2, or 1, using 4 methods of measurements. And everything in this final section, preparation, pre-scoring materials, rapport, discipline testing technique, is what determines the validity of everything that follows in this course. So next up is Module 2 with Miss Lucy. She's gonna go through with you and the milestones assessment at level 1, skills in details. And here is our references. Again, content in this presentation is paraphrased and adapted for Euniacare internal training use, and consult the original VB-MAPP guide and protocol for the full authoritative administration guidance.